Attention, you're about to hear a true story, a story that remained hidden for decades, an account based on rare documents, forgotten testimonies, and archives that nearly disappeared. Before we begin, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. And if you appreciate historical stories like this one, subscribe to the channel. Now, turn up the volume, turn off notifications, and join me in this investigation. Pause. The bridges stood like silent witnesses to history. Thin ribbons of steel and timber spanning rivers across Europe. Most have long since been replaced, but the story they tell, that endures. In the autumn of 1943, as Allied forces pushed through Italy and prepared for the invasion of France, a classified assessment circulated among German high command. The document, marked with the eagle stamp of Wehrmacht intelligence, contained an unusual observation about American engineering capabilities. Enemy bridgeworks constructed by white engineering battalions follow predictable patterns and can be targeted effectively. However, bridges erected by Negro units demonstrate unexpected resilience to artillery. Recommendation: prioritize bombing of bridges before Negro engineers can reinforce them. This document remained buried in military archives for almost 50 years, its existence denied, its implications ignored. Until 1992, when it was discovered among declassified German intelligence files. By then, most of the men who built those bridges were gone. But who were these soldiers? Why were their achievements scrubbed from official records? And how did their engineering prowess change the course of a world war? The story begins not in Europe, but at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. July 17, 1942. Morning formation. The newly activated 320th Engineer Battalion stood at attention as their white commanding officer addressed them for the first time. Captain James Wilson was 34 years old, a West Point graduate with combat experience in North Africa. He had not requested this assignment. In fact, he had specifically asked for a traditional combat engineering unit. Instead, he received command of one of the Army's few all-black engineering battalions. The men before him represented a cross-section of African-American experience. College-educated architects stood alongside railroad workers, carpenters next to mathematics teachers. In civilian life, their skills were often overlooked or undervalued. In the segregated America of 1942, black engineers rarely received opportunities equal to their talents. Lieutenant Robert Freeman, 27, a structural engineering graduate from Howard University, stood at the end of the front row. Before the war, despite graduating top of his class, Freeman had found himself limited to teaching positions. No major engineering firm would hire him. Now, he wore lieutenant's bars, but in a segregated army that still questioned whether black soldiers could perform complex technical tasks. Beside him stood Sergeant Marcus Johnson, 32, who had spent 15 years with the Southern Pacific Railroad. Johnson had helped build and repair bridges across 3 states. Yet, in the civilian world, he could rise no higher than assistant foreman, always reporting to less experienced white supervisors. Now he was a platoon sergeant, responsible for 40 men. Captain Wilson's initial briefing was terse, formal, devoid of inspiration. He explained their mission: combat engineering support, primarily bridge building and repair. They would be trained, deployed overseas, and expected to perform under combat conditions. That was all. As Wilson walked away, Sergeant Johnson turned to Lieutenant Freeman. "Think he knows what we can do?" Freeman watched their new commanders retreating back. "No," he said quietly, "but he will." Training at Fort Belvoir progressed with mechanical efficiency. The men learned to build Bailey bridges, temporary steel structures that could be rapidly deployed to replace spans destroyed by enemy action. They practiced under ideal conditions, then in rain, then at night with minimal lighting. They trained in mud, in simulated artillery fire with incomplete materials. The battalion's time trials soon caught the attention of Base Command. The 320th was assembling bridge sections faster than any other unit on base. Their structures showed superior load-bearing capacity and resilience to stress tests. Captain Wilson noted the achievements with clinical detachment in his reports. He forwarded the results up the chain of command, where they were received with skepticism. One colonel noted in the margin, "Results require verification. Timing methods may be inconsistent with other units." The verification tests were conducted under observation. The 320th performed even better, with superior officers watching. Still, in the final training assessment, they received only a satisfactory rating. Other white units with poorer performance records received superior or excellent. On December 4, 1943, the battalion received deployment orders. They would ship out to the Mediterranean theater, Italy, a country broken by war, its infrastructure systematically destroyed by retreating German forces, a land of mountains, valleys, and rivers, a place that needed bridges. The men of the 320th knew what awaited them. Not just the technical challenges or the danger from enemy fire. They understood that they would face the same prejudice they had experienced at home, now intensified by the stress of combat. What they could not know was that across the Atlantic, their future work was already being studied. Colonel Wilhelm Schmidt of German military intelligence had been tasked with analyzing Allied engineering capabilities. His reports would shape German strategy for demolition and defense. Schmidt had extensive pre-war experience with American engineering methods. He had visited the United States in 1936 as part of a technical exchange program, touring infrastructure projects and meeting with engineering firms. He had seen no black engineers during his visit. In fact, he had specifically noted in his report that American Negroes appeared to be employed exclusively in menial labor, not in technical roles. This observation would form the basis of a critical miscalculation, one that would eventually cost German forces dearly as they fought to hold territory against the Allied advance. The first test came in February 1944, near the small Italian town of Monte Cassino. The Rapido River needed to be bridged under artillery fire to support the Allied advance. Two previous attempts by other engineering units had failed. The bridges had been completed but destroyed by German shelling before armor could cross. The 320th received the assignment with less than 6 hours of preparation time. Lieutenant Freeman and Sergeant Johnson led the advance team to survey the river. Under sporadic sniper fire, they took measurements and assessed the banks. Johnson pointed to the far side. "They've got perfect sightlines to the crossing point." Freeman nodded. "They're waiting for us to start building. Soon as we do, artillery comes in. So we don't build where they're expecting." Pause. Are you following along so far? If this story is touching you, help us bring it to more people. A like makes a difference. A comment motivates us. A share multiplies our reach, and if you're not yet subscribed, join our community. Pause. Now, we return to the moment when everything truly began to change. Pause. Lieutenant Freeman's solution was unprecedented. Rather than building at the obvious crossing point, the 320th would construct their bridge 200 yards downstream, in a section partially obscured by trees. The completed structure would be floated into position using a system Johnson had developed for railroad bridges. Captain Wilson initially rejected the plan as too risky. Freeman persisted, explaining the mathematics and the precedents from civilian construction. Finally, Wilson relented. He would allow the attempt, but made it clear that failure would not be tolerated. Work began at 2300 hours. The men labored in near darkness, using techniques many had learned building structures across the American South, where working at night often meant avoiding hostile attention. By 3 in the morning, the main spans were completed. At 4:15, they began the delicate process of floating the structure into position. German artillery remained silent. Observation posts had reported American activity, but the unusual construction method had confused spotters. By the time they realized a bridge was being positioned, it was too late. The span locked into place at 5:23. 17 minutes later, the first Sherman tanks rumbled across. The bridge at Rapido River remained intact for the entire operation. German artillery eventually targeted it, but discovered another unexpected feature. The 320th had incorporated redundant support systems adapted from techniques used to strengthen bridges against flood damage in the Mississippi Delta. When sections were damaged, they could be rapidly repaired without compromising the entire structure. Colonel Schmidt received the report of this engineering anomaly with disbelief. He demanded photographs and detailed analysis. When they arrived, he spent hours studying the construction methods. They violated conventional military engineering doctrine, but incorporated principles he recognized from civilian infrastructure designed to withstand natural disasters. "Who built this bridge?" he asked his intelligence officer. "Reports indicate a Negro engineering battalion." Schmidt's response was not recorded in the official transcript, but witnesses later recalled his disbelief, followed by a slow reassessment of American capabilities. His subsequent orders reflected this new understanding. Bridges built by black engineers were to be targeted earlier, before completion, as they had proven too difficult to destroy once operational. Between March and September 1944, the 320th constructed 67 bridges across Italy. Their loss rate to enemy action was 17%. The average among other engineering battalions was 43%. Their techniques evolved with each construction. They incorporated local materials in innovative ways, adapted to changing terrain, and developed rapid repair protocols that kept transportation lines open despite repeated German attempts to sever them. In personal letters home, the men rarely mentioned their achievements. Sergeant Johnson wrote to his wife, "Doing our job, building bridges that help our boys move forward. Some days are harder than others. Missing you and little Marcus every day." Lieutenant Freeman was more direct in his correspondence with his former professor. "We are proving what you always taught us, that engineering principles transcend prejudice. Our bridges stand because physics doesn't care about the color of the hands that arrange the steel." Captain Wilson's reports became increasingly detailed and favorable as the campaign progressed. By August, he was specifically requesting the 320th be assigned the most critical crossings. His final assessment before the unit was transferred to France noted, "This battalion has demonstrated exceptional technical prowess and combat discipline. Their methods, while unconventional, have proven superior under battlefield conditions." This report, like many others documenting the achievements of black soldiers, would not appear in the official army history of the European campaign published after the war. As Allied forces prepared for the invasion of southern France in Operation Dragoon, knowledge of the 320th's capabilities spread through unofficial channels. Combat commanders requested them by name, often delaying bridge operations until those miracle workers could arrive. In November 1944, as Allied forces pushed toward the German border, they encountered increasingly desperate demolition tactics. Retreating German units not only destroyed bridges, but booby-trapped surrounding areas and prepared pre-sighted artillery positions focused on obvious reconstruction points. Near the town of Strasbourg, the 320th faced their greatest challenge. 3 successive engineering battalions had failed to establish a crossing over the Rhine tributary. Each attempt had been met with devastating artillery fire. More than 30 engineers had been killed in these attempts. Sergeant Johnson and Lieutenant Freeman spent 2 days conducting reconnaissance, often crawling within 100 yards of German positions to study the terrain. Their solution came from Johnson's railroad experience. Rather than building in segments from each bank, they would construct the entire span in a concealed position 2 miles downstream, then float the completed structure into place during pre-dawn fog. The operation required over 300 men working in coordinated teams. The bridge components were assembled in a forested area shielded from aerial observation. The completed sections were then transported by rafts, a process that took nearly 6 hours. German forces detected the activity but could not determine its purpose. By the time the massive structure swung into position, secured by underwater cables teams of engineers had placed days earlier, it was too late to target it effectively. Allied armor began crossing at first light. Colonel Schmidt personally observed this crossing through binoculars from a forward observation post. His adjutant later recalled that the colonel watched in silence for nearly an hour before speaking. "They have surpassed us," he said finally. "Their engineers have developed methods we never anticipated." When informed again that these were segregated black units, Schmidt reportedly responded, "Then America is fighting with one arm tied behind its back." What might these men accomplish if fully integrated into their forces? His insight would prove prophetic, though it would take the American military another 7 years to officially desegregate. As the war in Europe moved toward its conclusion, the 320th's reputation had spread even to frontline German units. Captured documents revealed that German demolition teams were specifically instructed to destroy certain bridges completely beyond repair if intelligence indicated black engineering units were in the area. Despite this recognition from their enemies, official recognition from their own army remained limited. When the final offensive across the Rhine was planned, the 320th was initially assigned to secondary crossing points. Only after the direct intervention of a corps commander who had previously witnessed their work were they reassigned to a critical sector. The 320th's final major bridge of the war spanned the Rhine near Mannheim on March 29, 1945. German resistance was fierce, with continuous artillery and air attacks throughout the construction. Despite losing 17 men, the battalion completed the bridge in record time. The structure withstood 2 attempted demolitions by German frogmen and remained in service until the temporary span was replaced by a permanent bridge in 1947. After Germany's surrender, the 320th was assigned to reconstruction efforts. Their innovations continued, now focused on rebuilding civilian infrastructure. They developed methods for rapidly clearing debris and assessing structural damage that would influence engineering practices for decades. Yet when the unit was deactivated in December 1945, their accomplishments received only passing mention in the official record. The men returned to an America still deeply segregated, their wartime achievements largely unknown beyond the units they had supported. Captain Wilson, promoted to major by war's end, submitted a detailed report recommending commendations for the battalion. The document disappeared into administrative channels. No unit citations were awarded. Individual medals for bravery and service were significantly fewer than those awarded to comparable white units. Lieutenant Freeman returned to civilian life and eventually founded one of the first black-owned engineering firms in Philadelphia. For 20 years, he attempted to document his unit's wartime innovations, submitting papers to engineering journals that were repeatedly rejected. Sergeant Johnson returned to the Southern Pacific Railroad, where he was initially offered his pre-war position as an assistant. He refused, applying instead to the engineering department. His application was denied. He persisted, carrying letters of recommendation from Army officers he had served with. After 3 months, he was reluctantly given a junior design position where his innovations soon proved their value. By 1960, he had risen to become the railroad's first black engineering supervisor. The story might have ended there. The achievements of the 320th fading into obscurity like so many contributions of Black Americans throughout history. But in 1972, a military historian named Dr. Eleanor Westfield began researching discrepancies in bridge construction records from the European theatre. Westfield had originally focused on supply logistics, but repeatedly encountered references to specialized engineering units whose bridges demonstrated superior resilience. When she cross-referenced unit deployments, a pattern emerged. These superior structures were invariably built by segregated black battalions. Her requests to access complete unit records were repeatedly delayed or denied. Eventually, she located Sergeant Johnson, by then retired, living in Oakland, California. His personal papers, including photographs, letters, and a detailed journal, provided the foundation for her research. In 1974, Westfield published Invisible Engineers' Black Innovation in World War II, the first comprehensive account of the 320th and similar units. The book received little attention outside academic circles. Several reviewers questioned her conclusions, suggesting she had exaggerated the contributions of Negro units for political reasons. The true vindication came from an unexpected source. In 1992, following the reunification of Germany, thousands of classified Wehrmacht documents became available to Western researchers. Among them was the collection of Colonel Wilhelm Schmidt's intelligence assessments, including his detailed analysis of Allied engineering capabilities. Schmidt's reports confirmed everything Westfield had documented, often in greater detail. The German officer, viewing American forces without the distorting lens of racial prejudice, had recognized and respected the superior techniques developed by black engineers. His reports to High Command had warned that these units represented a significant threat to German defensive strategy. Westfield, by then in her 70s, organized a reunion of surviving members of the 320th. 17 men attended, including Lieutenant Freeman and Sergeant Johnson, meeting for the first time in nearly 50 years. They gathered in Washington, D.C., not far from where they had trained at Fort Belvoir. Each brought photographs, documents, and memories long suppressed. Together, they reconstructed a history that had nearly been lost. Freeman, then 82, addressed the small gathering. "We built bridges for an army that didn't want us. We developed techniques they didn't understand. Our bridges carried men who wouldn't sit beside us on a bus back home. But we built them anyway. Because that's what engineers do. We solve the problem in front of us." Johnson, 87, added, "Those bridges weren't just steel and timber. They were statements. Each one said, 'Here is what we can do if given the chance.'" In 2001, the Army Corps of Engineers finally recognized the contributions of black engineering units, establishing a permanent exhibit at their museum. The display includes photographs, technical drawings, and a scale model of the Rhine crossing. The original bridging innovations developed by these units remain in use, both in military engineering and civilian infrastructure. Their techniques for rapid deployment and redundant support systems have been incorporated into modern bridge design, particularly in structures intended to withstand natural disasters. Captain James Wilson, who had initially approached his command with reluctance, became one of the strongest advocates for his men. In his final interview before his death in 1983, he reflected, "They were the finest engineering unit I ever witnessed, before or since." What they accomplished under combat conditions and constant prejudice was nothing short of miraculous. The fact that their story remains largely untold is a stain on our military history. Today, only a handful of men from these units remain alive. Their memories, preserved in oral histories and family archives, continue to emerge. Each account adds another piece to the puzzle of their nearly forgotten contribution. The bridges they built have long since been replaced by permanent structures. The rivers they crossed have returned to peaceful boundaries rather than military barriers. but the legacy of what they achieved against both enemy fire and institutional racism endures. Perhaps the most fitting testimony comes from Colonel Schmidt's final intelligence assessment, dated April 12, 1945, just weeks before Germany's surrender. The document, marked for High Command only, contained a passage that would not become public for nearly 50 years. The Negro engineering units have demonstrated capabilities that contradict all pre-war assessments of American military potential. Their innovative bridging techniques effectively neutralized our strategic demolition doctrine. In retrospect, our failure to anticipate their skills represents one of our most consequential intelligence oversights of the war. Recognition, ironically, came first from the enemy who had fought them. The country they served would take decades longer to acknowledge what these men had accomplished with steel spans across troubled waters. Pause. End of narrative. Pause. This story, like so many others, was almost forgotten. Your support ensures we continue to recover these accounts. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, comment what you thought, share with those who also appreciate real history, and explore our channel. There are more cases waiting for you. See you in the next episode.